Agents across North Carolina, Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia have all been impacted by the recent hurricanes, Helene and Milton. And the good thing is there is help out there. I spoke today to the CEO of KW Cares, that's Keller Williams Cares. Her name is Alexia Rodriguez. And we talked about some incredible stories of agents helping agents and how KW Cares helps their agents. Not only that, but she's willing to share her expertise with anyone interested in setting up this type of a fund. So enjoy the podcast. Lexi, welcome to the RealTrending podcast.
Thank you so much, Tracey, for having me. I'm so excited. This is my first podcast ever.
Well, great. Well, having you on the podcast to talk about kind of KW Cares and the response to the recent hurricanes, but I know that, you do a lot more than that. So why don't we just start out by you telling the audience a little bit about yourself and actually what KW Cares is?
Sure, happy to do that. So yes, my name is Alexia Rodriguez and I'm the CEO of KW Cares. I've been in this role for about 3.5 years. And KW Cares is a 501c3. In the nonprofit world, we're considered an employee hardship fund. We've been in existence for over 20 years. And during that time, we've given out over $63 million in grants and assistance to our KW family. So as an employee hardship fund, we were designed and our mission is to help Keller Williams associates that are experiencing a sudden emergency and need some financial assistance to get through that emergency. So yes, we do respond to natural disasters where we have a Keller Williams presence, which is pretty much all over the United States and Canada. And we also help associates when they have other kinds of emergencies that occur in their lives, such as getting a terrible cancer diagnosis or sometimes getting in a car accident and they need assistance for physical rehabilitation, all sorts of other emergent needs that come up in an associate's life. We're here to help them get through that.
That's amazing. And I know that you've had a rapid response to Hurricanes Helene and Milton, which, heavily affected parts of Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee. There's more, Georgia. So I'm in Florida, so we were hit. However, I'm in Orlando, so
thank goodness.
A lot of debris, but no major damage. So all good here.
That's right.
So tell me a little bit about how you kind of go into action once something like this happens.
Sure. So for our disaster relief program, we are in planning mode all year round. And the first thing that we do is make sure that we are very clear about our disaster relief program and the model and what that means with our associates in the field and, of course, with our leadership across the country. So throughout the year, we provide trainings on our model at different Keller Williams conferences and team meetings and such so that people know, okay, when a disaster strikes in your region, this is how KW Cares can help and how the help is going to get to you. So that's sort of number one, right? And then second, when there is an identified storm, such as Helene and Milton, for example, we immediately begin working with the regional leadership to develop what is going to be our response. One of the best practices we found, Tracey, is that we let the leadership, the regional leadership team there on the ground, set the level of response that's needed. So KW Cares can do a number of different things. We can open up our hotline to issue and process emergency grants of up to $5,000 to the associates that are in the affected area. Or we can stand up a command center, which means we send all sorts of supplies such as generators, extension cords, box fans, and water to the affected area, or anything in between, right? So depending on the storm and depending on the leadership team, their boots on the ground, they know their people the best, right? We leave it up to them to say, okay, this is going to be a Cat 1 storm, a hurricane, for instance, let's have this level of response, all the way up to this is going to be a Cat 5 hurricane, and we want a full-on command center with all of the supplies being sent to our area. So we are in constant communication with them as soon as we see an identified storm coming their way, or if it's a natural disaster that strikes without notice, such as a tornado, we immediately get on the phone and start working with that regional leadership team to plan our response. During the actual, or right after the actual response, our very first thing that we always want to do is make sure that our associates are safe. So we have our phone trees that go into action, which each market center and regional leadership activates. And their number one goal right after the storm is to account for every one of our agents. And that's done. Typically, we're able to do that quickly. After Hurricane Helene, though, it took almost 10 days to account for all of our agents in that area because it was just so hard hit and it was such an unusual storm. But thankfully, I can say after Hurricane Helene and after Hurricane Milton, all of our agents have been accounted for.
That's wonderful. Let's go into more specifics about the response. Obviously Helene and some parts of like Western North Carolina, it was impossible to get in
That's
there right away. Florida too, you've got Siesta Key, which was like hit really badly. You had tornadoes all through the east coast of Florida. So give me more specifics about what you've done and some of the stories that you've heard of agents, kind of the resilience of agents in that area. I don't need names.
Right.
I know they want to keep that private, but
that's right.
Some of the stories of just things that have happened and the resilience that they've showed.
Sure. So I did want to say that for KW Cares, we have two warehouses that we keep our supplies in, right? And one is in Austin, Texas, and one is in Tampa, Florida. And the reason we have two is because we want to be able to distribute supplies as soon as we can after the storms hit. So for Hurricane Helene, you mentioned folks couldn't get in there, and that's true, except we have some incredible volunteers that were, in fact, able to get into the affected areas in the Carolinas within 24 hours of Helene hitting that area. So we distributed over 600 generators after the storm, and we started that distribution within 24 hours of the storm hitting. So our model works in the sense that KW Cares purchases and sends those supplies, the generators and extension cords and those other things that I mentioned. But we also rely on the regions to have a core of volunteers to receive those items, right? And that's an equally important part of the equation in terms of how we help our associates. Those volunteers receive the supplies and then they distribute them locally. We were able to do that, again, like I said, within 24 hours of Helene hitting. The Carolinas, we also were able to distribute over 200 generators in Florida within the same period, within 24 hours. And that's because we have that warehouse there in Florida. If we were pulling those supplies from Austin, it would have taken longer. But we've learned from previous storms, it's better to be located, have our supplies in two different areas, not just one. And we're able to touch our folks really quickly. Oftentimes, we're there before FEMA even gets there, which was the case in both of these storms.
Okay. And the volunteers, are they other agents or their families?
They're other agents. And I think you asked me about some of the stories that have touched me. One of the most beautiful things that I saw, because I flew over to Asheville myself to be part of the relief effort. And I was just blown away, Tracey, by these volunteers, folks that showed up at the market center to help us distribute those generators and water and so on and so forth. These were folks that were affected themselves. I met several people that had lost their own homes that should have been the recipients of, and they were the recipients, of our assistance. But they came up and they rolled up their sleeves and they wanted to pitch in to help the other members in their market center that were affected. That just took my breath away. I was just so impressed by their heart and their generosity in terms of giving of themselves. And then just in terms of other stories, I mean, in Asheville in particular, the devastation, it's real. It was heartbreaking. And I mean, everyone in the market center that I met, if they weren't personally affected, then they knew someone that was going to be affected. That whole community is going to be without running water for weeks on end. Some of the reports we've seen is over 2 months. We just, in my experience in this role, haven't seen a disaster where the response was going to take that long to get such a basic necessity to folks. In Florida over the weekend, I spoke to a gentleman. You mentioned the tornadoes. He's a single dad and he called in for an emergency grant. His home was completely demolished by a tornado. And, he's taking care of his daughter. They had nowhere to go. They were able to get an emergency grant from us so that he could have a roof on his head and put food on the table for his daughter. Another thing that's heartbreaking is that I spoke to many associates over the weekend in terms of these emergency grants. and they had to evacuate. They were in a mandatory evacuation zone. And I don't think most of us stop to think about, okay, you're in a mandatory evacuation zone. The governor is saying you need to leave or you could die. Well, who's going to pay for that? The government doesn't pay for that. And our agents and associates, they've been struggling through a really difficult and challenging real estate market the last couple of years. They're living paycheck to paycheck. So they had to, make the decision, obviously, to leave for safety purposes, but they don't have any way to pay for hotel or food. So when they call in for our assistance and I get to tell them, you're going to get a $5,000 grant, you can imagine, Tracey, those conversations that myself and my team are having. It's just absolutely beautiful. And we just feel so honored to be able to step in when they need us the most.
Yeah, I think, I think the hardest thing for some people is to ask for that help to begin with. They feel like,
yes.
We just had a little flooding, or, we just lost our office. It'll be back. Do you find that the network really just takes care of each other, so that people who may not really feel comfortable asking for that help still get it?
Yes, I definitely see that. I definitely see at KW in general, our leadership across the board stepping up to encourage people to apply for those grants. The way that we get all of our revenue, Tracey, is through associates and agents giving, primarily through what we call transactional giving. When they close on a house, they can elect to give us a donation as part of their commission. And, we have heard many times, I don't want this grant. It's for somebody else that needs it more than I do. Yeah. And we really rely on our leadership teams. And of course, KW Cares as well. We're putting out messages that this is for you. You have contributed to us so much over the years. It's time for you to receive some of this generosity that you put out there yourself. And so that helps, right? And we definitely have been, in the last few years in particular, like I mentioned, with this real estate market being so challenging, we've just seen an incredible increase in requests for grant assistance across the board at KW Cares, not just because of natural disasters, but in particular for those other catastrophic events that we were talking about earlier in the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your network, in the areas that were affected by the hurricanes, what is the status of the offices? Do you know the number of offices that are still offline, not able to, still need to either be rebuilt or powered? They don't have power yet, whatever it is.
So most of our offices are all online, thank goodness. Okay. After Hurricane Ian a couple years ago in Florida, we definitely had a couple of market centers that were just completely wiped off the map. That is not the case with these two storms. However, in Asheville, like I mentioned, they don't have running water. So KW Cares actually hired portable bathrooms that came in and are set up in the parking lot there, so that at least our folks can have a little bit of dignity and respect. To use the facility is something that we take for granted every single day. But thank goodness all of our market centers, the structures are fine and they're up and running and have electricity.
Yeah. What I think people miss is the number of transactions that are disrupted by something like this.
Yes.
You've got houses ready to close that don't close because of damage or potential damage. You've got situations where houses were completely demolished or withdrawn listings or, whatever it is. Tell me a little bit about that impact. And I would assume that's an area where they could claim hardship as well to receive that.
Correct.
Grant.
That's correct, Tracey. I'm really glad you brought up that point, because obviously anytime any natural disaster hits any community around the world, there's a devastating impact. For real estate agents, it's a double whammy. They lose their ability to earn an income in most of these cases for months at a time, sometimes years at a time, right? So they're not on salary. They're not getting paid from a typical job that maybe other folks have, right? Have the benefit of continuing to get that salary as they rebuild. Our agents don't have that ability. So yes, so long term, this is where KW Cares comes in with our bigger grants, which we call the catastrophic hardship grants, and as we help people rebuild their lives. So it may be helping someone that needs to rebuild a home because they lost all of it, like the gentleman that lost his home in the tornado. Yes, he has insurance. Yes, the insurance will pay for a certain portion of that, but oftentimes it doesn't cover all of what this person has lost. The other thing is, without the ability to generate an income after these storms, most of our agents can't afford to pay for basic necessities. So what we see is that they can't afford to pay for their health insurance premiums. So when something happens to themselves or their family members, their kid gets leukemia, their husband gets prostate cancer, their wife gets breast cancer, they don't have an ability to pay for those medical bills. So that's when they turn to us, and we're there to help them with a larger grant to help them get through that experience.
Okay, that's great. And so I guess what are some of the long-term recovery, actions that you take? Can you elaborate a little bit about those programs and what you do past the emergency funding, kind of like you said, the catastrophic funding?
That's really where we come in, Tracey, is with that catastrophic hardship grant,
Okay.
because someone can apply for that in the months to come and the years to come. We don't have any other sort of rebuilding efforts with the community at large, but for our associates, it's that catastrophic hardship grant. The other thing that we do at Keller Williams, and this is a Keller Williams headquarters initiative, is we have a program called Adopt an Agent. So after someone has turned to KW Cares and has received an emergency grant or even a catastrophic hardship grant, those grants are capped at $30,000. An agent may still have ongoing needs. And that's where the Adopt an Agent program comes in. It's a really beautiful program. And this is where we have market centers in the unaffected areas in Iowa and North Dakota and California that step in and say, we want to, as a market center, the 500 agents in this market center in Los Angeles, California, wants to adopt an agent in Asheville, North Carolina, and help them rebuild their lives as well. So they get in touch with that agent and they might provide furniture or towels, or you can imagine all those things that we use every day. They send gift cards or they create an Amazon wish list, and those agents are helped in that capacity too. So that is another way that Keller Williams steps up to help these folks during these times.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We talked before we got on the podcast a little bit about some of the best practices, for other brokerages or, a lot of the major companies have foundations and that set up like this. But what if, you're a broker, independent or something that you want to set something up? What are some of the best practices that you've kind of learned over the years?
Well, sure. I mean, I can speak to what's called an employee hardship fund, which is the kind of nonprofit that KW Cares is. This is probably not relevant for sort of a small brokerage, more relevant to a larger corporation, and not just in the real estate industry, Tracey. The employee hardship funds exist across all of corporate America. And one of the things I wanted to say is that every other year there is a conference for employee hardship funds. And I was able to attend one in February of this year. And all the major players were there: Home Depot, Victoria's Secret, American Airlines. And what I found and what I learned is that KW Cares gives more to our associates than any of those other employee hardship funds. It's beautiful they have had it, but I just have to take a moment to say I'm just really proud of our Keller Williams culture, where they come in at such a high level with such big hearts and huge generosity to help our people during these times of need, right? Natural disasters and other needs. So in terms of employee hardship funds, I do think that it is a very effective and really an underutilized tool. Some companies have them. Some companies have nonprofits where they pick a designated cause, but they're not necessarily helping their own people in this manner. They may not have an employee hardship fund. And if they don't, I highly encourage corporate America to establish one. And there definitely are a few best practices around that. One of the very most important ones is that it needs to be embedded in the overall company culture, Tracey. It needs to be supported at the highest levels by the CEO, the executive managers, and the board of directors. And that has to be visible across the company, that the leadership is coming in and supporting it at a high level. This week in particular, on our national growth call that all of the leadership across Keller Williams participates in every Monday, Mark Willis, who is our CEO, handed me a check for $25,000 and encouraged other people to step up and do the same. That kind of leadership and that kind of example speaks volumes, and people will follow that lead, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing is that companies have all sorts of access to promote the Employee Hardship Fund through their social media, regular emails, company meetings. And the fund really needs to have visibility across all of those avenues as well, in particular, so that we can storytell and get the news out there, right, of the impact that this fund is making. And so and finally, in terms of a best practice, which is really important, is having the company create an avenue that's easy to give. I talked about transactional giving, right? So on our internal CRM platform that our agents use to do transactions, there is a pop-up that comes up immediately. Would you like to give a donation to KW Cares? Yes. Great. Here you go. There's also a functionality on there that's what we call set it and forget it, that they can set a certain amount that immediately gets deducted from their commission. And that comes over to us each month, right? Or every time they close. And I just want to stress that transactional giving makes up about 80% of our annual revenue. So creating an easy way for agents or associates or employees to give, super critical. So those are some of the best practices that we've found across the board. And again, I just want to highlight that what we've seen in terms of our Employee Hardship Fund and what the research actually shows is that associates feel relieved when they know that this fund exists, Tracey, and when they are encouraged to use it, right? And so that really stimulates, it helps them have peace of mind, and it helps them focus on the work, and it stimulates productivity. And, the research shows that they feel very connected to employ, like when there's an employee hardship fund, these folks feel very connected to that company, and it also helps in terms of retention.
Yeah. And do you work, I know like NAR has a disaster relief fund. I know Florida Realtors has one as well. They're very active right now promoting that to their members. And I do believe it's, in the hardship fund that you're talking about. I think it's the same thing. It's not a foundation or anything. Do you ever work hand in hand with them, either nationally or statewide?
No, we don't. We are just really focused on our own folks, because we are a 501c3, we are a nonprofit. And so our charter allows us to work with KW associates and their dependent family members. So no, at this point, we haven't connected with NAR or any of those other foundations or organizations.
Okay. Well, it's good to know for those listening that they're available as well.
That's absolutely true.
So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a tremendous amount of other NGOs, Red Cross and AmeriCares that are on the boots on the ground in both the Carolinas and Florida in the affected areas that folks can avail themselves up to. They do great work.
Yeah, I think it is hard for people to know everything that's available, though. And also, it's good for them to understand that just because they got like an emergency grant from you doesn't mean they can't go to someone else for help either. That
Correct.
We understand the need is probably greater than what can be provided in some instances. So
that's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
But I do think, Tracey, this is a really great. What KW Cares is a great example of a private and public partnership to help people rebuild their lives, right? And we're on the private side, and then you have the governmental sector that's there, of course, that's going to help in these efforts. But I think, having other companies, not just real estate companies, but any other company that can set their mind to establishing this kind of nonprofit, this employee hardship fund, it's going to go a long way in terms of helping people rebuild during times of disaster. But again, also just when an employee experiences another kind of hardship, like we mentioned, cancer, that kind of thing, to have this kind of fun and having your associates know they can depend on you, it goes a long way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, any last thoughts, to kind of cap off the podcast?
Well, I just want to take an opportunity for all of our donors that are listening to say thank you. Our tagline is family helping family, Tracey, and we see that being played out at the highest levels, in particular after these storms. And then I want to say, if you're not a KW person and you're listening, and in particular, if you're in position of leadership and you're interested in starting Employee Hardship Fund, reach out to us. We are so, so happy to share our best practices. This is a model that can be replicated across the country and across other countries, actually. And we're here to help. We just want to help everyone, the public at large, in this manner. So, we're here. KW Cares is here to help.
Lexi, thanks so much for joining Real Trending. And, I wish you the best and your agents the best as they manage all of the fallout from the recent storms.
Thanks, Tracey. And thanks for giving us a platform to tell our story. It's so important to get the word out. Thank you.